Sure. As one of our Zoom participants mentioned, is Sandy Krolick. Sandy holds a doctorate in religion from the University of Virginia and a master's in the history of culture from the University of Chicago. After 10 years in academia, he spent the next 20 years in senior executive ranks and partnership positions at several of America's largest international firms, including Ernst & Young, General Electric, Computer Sciences Corporation. He retired from his last corporate post at the age of 49 and became the CEO at PKG Entertainment, where he served as the executive producer for Any Wonder, the debut release of Boston-based band Violent Nine, and the soundtrack for the indie film National Lampoon's Cattle Call. He also has been an in-house executive consultant on international cooperation with the Altai State Pedagogical University in Barnaul, Russia. Now, Sandy currently lives in Estero, Florida, with his partner, Lucy Lettuce, who is a member of the society, and I'm sure many of you know her. And I'm happy to say that their new house in Estero survived the hurricane, and while they are without potable water, they do have electricity, and obviously they have the internet. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sandy.
Good afternoon. Good morning, I guess. Once upon a time in America, citizens had an abiding faith in the strength of their mutual relations, what I refer to here as the social architecture of community. These relationships allowed individuals to engage one another within a relatively safe environment. Under those conditions, the American dream was alive and well and running rather smoothly over some well-worn tracks. Such engagement was reflected by widespread participation in all manner of association, including religious congregations, trade unions, chambers of commerce, humanitarian service clubs like Rotary, Lions, and the Kiwanis, as well as a host of other broad-based community organizations. Now, it's important to note here that the word community derives from two Latin roots, cum and munus, loosely translated as to give or to share with one another. Yet perhaps this definition seems rather quaint in today's increasingly competitive environment. A world where communio or sharing suddenly feels more like giving something up or giving something away. Still, as a youth growing up in the late 1950s and early 60s, I found that the apparent security provided by community created a safe haven for enjoying everyday life. Faith in community provided the sense of a world and a worldview that was stable, if not unshakable. However, as I grew older, such assurances seemed to evaporate like hot steam on a mirror. In turn, the stabilizing effects of communitas slowly eroded, perhaps proving that this initial faith was somewhat naive. The loss of faith in community has shown that while people can behave in surprisingly harmonious ways when joined together, communicating or collaborating, it also reveals the potential dissonance or madness of the crowd as well. In a 1970 article published by The New Yorker, Charles Reich, a principal component of the 60s countercultural movement and the author of The Greening of America, put into rather stark relief what appeared an emergent challenge to the social architecture on whose basis several generations of Americans were nurtured and raised. As he wrote at the time, there is a revolution underway. It is not like revolutions of the past. It has originated with the individual and with culture. And if it succeeds, it will change the political structure only as its final act. It will not require violence to succeed. It cannot be successfully resisted by violence. It is now spreading with amazing rapidity, and already our laws, institutions, and social structures are changing in consequence. Its ultimate creation could be a higher reason, a more human community, and a new and liberated individual. This is the revolution of the new generation. Of course, while the influence of Reich's revolutionary call should not be minimized, we must also note that he was heralding a revolution without violence, a cultural revolution aimed at addressing the issue of personal freedom, political equality, and the future direction of civic engagement. So while the foundations of our social architecture were here under question, Reich was calling us not to bear arms against one another, but rather to engage in debate and dialogue, a collective reassessment of the country's social architecture. In short, he sought to expand communication within community. Now let's fast forward to the present day, to the America of a post-Trump presidency. We all watched in amazement and horror as the political grounding of our social architecture was being ripped from its from its moorings, as it was ripped from its moorings by violence. It was an attempt to overthrow our very system of governance. While Reich's screening and its consciousness-raising revolution of the 70s was a cultural rebellion aimed principally at the corporate state, this new insurgency now attacking us in city streets, as well as in our election boards, governor's offices, and courthouses, including in the Supreme Court. This is a different creature altogether. This new insurgency is an oddly authoritarian intrusion emerging within a specific segment of the body politic itself and giving rise to a host of conspiratorial movements. The rise of groups like QAnon, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and other militaristic neo-fascist ideologies is more than a cautionary tale. According to Public Religion Research Institute findings earlier this last year, nearly 20% of Americans and 25% of Republicans believe in one or more of the QAnon conspiracies alone. Furthermore, QAnon congressional candidates were on the ballot in at least 26 states as of April 2022. But this is only the tip of an iceberg that is expanding as it seeks to undermine our commitment to social amity, democratic process, and finally, rational thought. But let us focus specifically on the QAnon conspiracy and its impact on the most recent presidential transition. As a uniquely American millenarian-type cargo cult, guided by the same presumptions of white privilege seen in its would-be savior, Donald Trump, QAnon thrust into the open several strange elements of an undeniably alternative reality. This cult maintains a worldview grounded in a haunting and anachronistic religious eschatology. It is not surprising then that we find blue and white collar Christians among some of QAnon's most ardent supporters, especially among Christian evangelicals. Indeed, the conspiracy has emerged as a reactionary apocalyptic nationalist movement, promoting themes that harken back as far as the New Testament's book of Revelations. For QAnon believers, marching elbow to elbow down the National Mall with their white nationalist brethren Trump represented a once and future king, their anointed savior, his executive role evidenced by fomenting violence in our capital. With sticks and stones, guns and body armor, battering rams and bear spray, Trump's cult followers sought to destroy those who would dare oppose their insurrectionist intentions. With perhaps a touch of irony, and not unlike Jesus's purported overturning of the money changers' tables at the Jerusalem temple, Trump's near mythical status had served to unleash his own legions on our very temple of democracy, seeking to overturn not only the results of an election, but concurrently destroy the foundations of our social architecture. The symbolism here is both thick and rich. Galvanized by Trump and prodded on by sycophants like Jake Angeli, their self-anointed shaman, the insurrectionists hammered away at our capital as they continued hammering out elements of their own mythically constituted social reality. With a blend of Norse, neo-fascist, and more archaic mythological imagery, his followers literally sought to carve out a new social architecture, one delivering a new heaven and a new earth as they imagined it. For the most part, these disgruntled insurrectionists communicated in a veiled tongue as well, a language laced with symbolism and metaphor. One favorite symbol of the group was that of the storm, apparently serving as a placeholder for an apocalyptic event that was to herald the final day of reckoning. This was to be the day when their savior, Trump, would make his salvific return, exploding across the national stage, while the infidels, all those blood-drinking pedophiles of the deep state, would finally receive their long overdue and divinely mandated retribution. Such sentiments bring us awfully close to an eschatological vision of the end time, much as we find in the New Testament's revelation of St. John the Divine and its symbolic representation of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. As we read in chapter 6 of that book, and I quote, "I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as the conqueror bent on conquest. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay one another. To him was given a large sword. I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was death, and Hades followed close behind him." Surely these lines give us pause when considering events surrounding the attempted insurrection. Again, the use of image and symbol is key to QAnon's message, just as we find in the apocalyptic vision of St. John. So perhaps, and by way of paraphrase, it may not be too far-fetched to say the following of Donald Trump's assault on the Capitol, both in his own mind and in the minds of his followers. He sought a crown for his head and, with a pair of scales in his hand, wished to ride out like a conqueror, destroying peace on earth as men slayed one another, leaving only death and destruction in his wake. Of course, it is no accident that QAnon believers are steeped in religious mythology. And given their predilection for apocalyptic eschatology, the energy of this cult has drawn millennialists and extremists of all stripes, including white supremacists, Christian evangelicals, and other factions into its fold. But if we look back into the very founding of our nation, if we look at the roots of such cult-like activity may already have been growing from the earliest stirrings of white privilege, witnessed with the emergence of the American spirit centuries earlier. And now the same nationalist spirit has been unleashed through the progeny of immigrants whose forefathers had invaded this land centuries earlier. As suggested above, this is merely the tip of an iceberg that is much larger and has been growing for longer than we may care to admit. Its origins can be found among those first explorers who dared set foot in the New World, decimating and enslaving its indigenous inhabitants. In short, the mythologically infused movement of that seditious mob may have already been baked into the cake since before our founding, just waiting to explode again. And I'm afraid to say that while we've already seen some real fire and brimstone, this volcano may be just about to erupt, spewing heated destruction into all corners of our land. I'm afraid this uneasy but unlikely alignment or political convergence of a mythico-religious millenarianist movement with a violent and broadly nationalistic conspiracy is leading us fast and furiously to a potentially apocalyptic end. As the congressional representative Donna DeGette remarked in the Senate hearings over a year ago, we now can see, quote, the first stab in a greater revolution. Circling back to our earlier discussion concerning destruction of our social architecture, let's consider a few lingering but critical questions. Is it already too late to coax these mythologically driven reactionaries to engage in some form of reasoned debate? Or has their blind faith in the myth, still tethered to an aggressive neo-fascist ideology, eclipsed their capacity for discussion and open engagement? Apparently, the insurgents have no desire for genuine dialogue or debate. Rather, and in partnership with their far-right leaning congressional sponsors, they seek hand-to-hand combat instead. They want to disrupt and ultimately transform an otherwise reasonable socio-political structure into an autocratic, religiously driven ideology. So, what should we now expect? And what avenues are there for action? I'm afraid there may not be too many options available, nor the possibility of achieving very much, unless and until we elect politicians blessed with both reason and a genuine capacity for moral judgment. By this, I do not simply mean electing Democrats, but Republicans and independents as well. Anyone who shares our interest in leading both a political and legal movement to protect the country against theocracy. If not, we may be condemned much like Sisyphus in the myth, just rolling a boulder up the mountain, only to have it tumble back down to the bottom each and every time. So are we simply going to resign ourselves and sit quietly on our hands? Or are there actions we may take? And are there reasons for us to hope against hope, that our efforts may be fruitful? Perhaps this remains our best, if not our only option. Thank you.
Do we have David?
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm coming through now. Thank you, Sandy. That's a very interesting and even provocative thesis. We're going to open this up for questions, and like before, we'll take 2 from the room and then 2 from Zoom land. Do we have anyone in the room? Ron Schwartz?
Thank you for that gloomy assessment of where we are now. I have a little different view. Lisa and I, as you know, have been very active in politics and TNEC and in the world at large. I see, from my point of view, from the inside activist role, thousands and thousands of people that I've never seen before becoming active in political activity, not only here, but across the country. There are thousands of groups that, as we speak, are writing postcards to people in other states to get them to vote. There are people who are making phone calls. There are people who are making political contributions by way of money. In the 50 years or so that I've been politically active, I've never seen this type of political activity before. So yes, there is a fight going on for the soul of this country, but there is another side, and that is our side. Everybody sitting here who's listened to this, Mr. Krolick's assessment of what's going on, and it's real. Everybody here is looking into themselves and saying, how can I fight this? What can I do? And November 8th is coming up, and you know what you have to do. You have to vote. You have to tell your friends to vote. You have to do even more than that. You have to get involved with these groups, postcards that are outside here that Lisa's been working on to put packages together to write to people in Georgia, which is a very close race, to write to people in North Carolina, which is a very close race, to get them to come out and vote for the rational people that will take us out of this possible apocalypse. So I see hope on the other side. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Ron. Any other questions from the room? Eric.
Thanks, Ron. Well, I think you've, in many ways accurately identified the problem. The other side is attacking the Capitol and marshaling their forces. We're writing postcards to get more Democrats elected. I mean, this to me that's the essence of the imbalance between us. And Sandy, you put out a secular eschatology, if you will. This is the storm that's coming for us, is QAnon. But what I'd like to hear is a secular teleology. That is to say, what are we really here for? Are we here as ethical culture to elect more Democrats? I can't believe that that's the sum total of our mission. I think there's something more. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
A secular teleology. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Eric, thank you for the question. I think that you have something in mind. I would love to get you back at the microphone and hear your prospective view on that, secular teleology. Yeah.
I'll ask that we maybe hold that to the end. Yeah. Since
Okay.
you're the speaker. We're going to keep you on the hot seat.
We're going to keep a secular, the teleology is the end time, what the future holds, the denouement. I don't know what was the first word in the eschatology again?
A secular eschatology.
Secular eschatology. Of course, in the religious eschatology, there's the end of the world, the rising of the good and the destruction of the evil ones. Of course, the evil ones are the non-believers. So we would be the non-believers. What a secular eschatology might look like, I'm not quite sure, Eric. I'm just not quite positive.
Okay. Do we have any questions from Zoomland?
I'd like to remind people that if they need to raise their hand, they need to do it electronically, and that's through the reactions button. And if you're on a phone, then it is *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute. We have one hand raised. Javier, I'm going to add you to the pin. Go ahead, Javier. Ask
I would like to know for the gentleman, since he got a history major, how much of religion aspects had diminished on today's day that are different from the past. Those values that we had in the past were religious influence or were just cultural influence?
No, I think the American vision was established on some pretty strongly religious grounds, in contrast to what was happening in the continent. And so the religious sentiments of the Americans, of the new Americans, was fairly strong, but in a different direction from the European conditions under which they had been living. That religious sentiment grew and really never left, even though there was a shift in the cultural views of Americans over the centuries. The religious elements remain strong and foundational, even in God we trust, and the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. I mean, up until I was out of grammar school. So the religious sentiment has always been there. And that is what's reemerging here in a very extremist format, such that it's really pushing back strongly on the more egalitarian view of the relations within society. And they want to impose a particular worldview, a religious worldview, a Christian religious worldview, on the entire populace. And that's a reemergence of a very old. I mean, look at what the settlers did to the American Indians, and transforming their beliefs, their traditional belief systems, and trying to change them into Christians. It's again the same impetus in a new dress.
But with that emerging of religion that you talk about right now, is trying to catch up with the values of the past?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that, Javier.
This re-emerging of religion,
Yes,
is trying to catch up with the values of the past?
yeah, I think it's a re-instantiation, a new instantiation of the deep, profoundly religious sentiment that lie at the basis of this country, and that it is these elements that are reemerging and trying to reconstruct a world and a worldview that we put behind us over the last 40 years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. And I have another hand raised of Sandeepa Dublish. If you wait one moment, I will bring you into a pin. There you are. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you so much. I think my question builds upon maybe the previous comment, which I did not understand about the secular something. But the question really is based on, I think you started your talk by saying the social architecture is fragmented or broken. And I think historically, maybe religion provided that social architecture or but in a diverse society and where we are, how do you think, based on your knowledge and this history of cultures, is how do we build a social architecture? Is that the way to, because we understand the problem, but how do we build a new type of social architecture that sort of brings people together?
Well, it may be through a social conflagration that we build a new one. Maybe through like almost an alchemical death and rebirth, that this country gets back into a position where it can move forward. But the contest right now between the left and the right, or the cultural neutral and the culturally Christian or religiously motivated. We don't want to pin every Christian in this framework. That those two elements are apparently aligned to have some sort of an explosion, some sort of a big mix-up, some sort of a conflagration, unless and until we can get people. And I don't even know if getting people in power who are more ecumenical will make it any different. I think there's really two camps now developed in the United States that are pitted against one another, and I think it doesn't bode well for the future, regardless of who wins what elections.
Okay, well,
Thank
go
you
to
very
the
much.
room now. Mark? Oh, yeah, Mark, and then Lisa.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I think it's important to mention that.
Do you want to go up in the camera?
I could stay.
All right.
But I think we need to look at what are the conditions, the contemporary conditions, the world conditions that have triggered this form of reemergence. So it's always been there in the background, but the way it manifests is something that's it's transitional. It's transforming all the time, and in times of economic prosperity and what have you, maybe it manifests differently, and with the plurality. So also that what Eric was talking about, the eschatology, the secular eschatology. I've been studying object relations theory and psychoanalytic theory, and there's this whole idea of object splitting and ego splitting, and a lot of mythologies deal with black and white. So it's either all good or it's all bad. So I think for secular eschatology, we need to be moving more towards the grays and a more mature ego development of people to be able to have an ambivalent relationship and to be able to look at things to see they're not all black or all white, and to be able to hold these different things together. So I was just wondering what you thought about that. Maybe, we have so much more pluralism, and we need to be able to hold more influences together, and that would be the secular eschatology in some way, and rather than splitting. So culturally and historically moving, not just as far as individuals, but as a society to be able to hold everything together in a gray kind of.
Yeah, I think this issue of the secular eschatology is interesting. I think it's the thing that's getting in the way now, and that's really changed the dynamics, if you will, is a person, and what that person represents. His name is Donald Trump. What he represents to a large swath of anti-culturalists, or whatever you might want to call them, but people that are not at all satisfied with the way society is going and their role within that society and our society. And so we have to deal with the horse that's in the room, and we have to figure out a way, if it's possible, because what Donald Trump has basically done was to unleash a silent underbelly of this culture that, as I said, as I mentioned in the talk, has been there from the very beginning of the instantiation of the American Republic. That the desire to overtake the indigenous populations and enslave them and make this land ours is the same intuition, the same general mindset that's driving the insurrectionists today. They see us as inhabiting their land and trying to change their stake and to retake what they once took.
Actually, you want to
No.
go up to? Yeah. Lisa Schwartz has the next question.
Well, actually, it'll end with a question, but I just do need to make a comment, if I can. Yeah, so I want to address Sandy's point, I want to address Ron's point, and I also want to respond to Eric. So I'm sorry. I'll try to be brief and then end with a question. But there's a lot of reason to be really fearful. And I think if we have this apocalyptic view, and I wake up every morning with anxiety and whenever I read the news. So certainly that fear and that view is powerful. And my fear is that we can become so anxious about it that it immobilizes us. And I see a lot of that. I see a lot of people getting really depressed and anxious. So in my view, to echo Ron, the only way to counter that is through action. And yes, we are writing postcards, Eric, and that seems very mundane, but there are hundreds of thousands of people writing these postcards and making phone calls and going to rallies. So it's not just one aspect of what we are doing, writing the postcards. But, we're part of the larger community of activists out there. And in my view, that is the only way to counter what is happening now. And I don't think the answer is that we're, voting for Democrats. I think really what we're voting for is our freedom. We're voting for reproductive rights. We're voting for voter rights. We are voting right now for our very democracy versus autocracy. So if that means voting in the Democrats because they're the ones that represent that, it's not the final, it's not going to be the end. We have a lot of fighting to do if we are successful in 22 and winning our democracy. If we're not, my passport's renewed, so where do we go, So that's what I wanted to just echo. I'm sorry, it's not a question, but Sandy, I just do want to ask, how you feel about that and the actions that you feel we should be taking to counter this. So thanks.
Thanks. Am I on?
Yes.
The one unfortunate thing is that they have guns and we have votes. There's a little disparity between those two positions. And I'm not suggesting that we take up arms. That's not what I'm suggesting. I guess I'm just cynical about what can be achieved given the raw atmosphere that has been created over the past 5 years. An atmosphere that we have never witnessed before, I don't think, since maybe the Civil War. And it's just a frightening situation. So Lisa, I think it's interesting to try to get out the vote. And I think that's one thing we can do. But look, they've even told us down to a person, they have stated that the votes don't count. If you guys win, it's not real. You cheated. So I just don't know what's left for us to do. It's frustrating.
Okay, we'll go over to Zoom land.
Thank you. We have 3 hands raised. So we'll take 2 and then go back to the room. First, please, Richard Askins, unmute yourself and I will pin you. There you go.
Hi, Mr. Krolick.
Hello, Richard.
I have a couple questions, actually. One that's very interesting to me, since you are a historian, if I have that correct.
More of a philosopher of religion, but that's okay.
Well, I spent a lot of my early life being an engineer. I think a very good engineer, but an engineer. So I've only read a lot of history afterwards now. And one of the things I'm interested in is that over the course of my lifetime, the most prominent evangelicals have stated this is a Christian nation. In one sense, I think they're absolutely right. I think many of the people that came here starting from the beginning were Christians. And it's not just a matter that they came here, as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but many of them were actually thrown out of the European countries because of the religious wars, and they were sects that were too extreme, so they were dumped here.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know, I don't know if people realize this so much. Everything you said seems to comport with what the little I know about it. What I'd like to know is, are there any good books? I've been trying to find them and I can't, that indicate just how, even though the best in our country at the time of the revolution managed to, I think the majority, at least were deists, or many of them, to make a secular constitution. Many people that were very religious and in strange way intensely religious didn't worry about that back then because they had domination of their local area with guns and so forth and their religion. But now, now that things are changing so much and they feel so lost, they will take their religion, the worst parts of their religion, and try to apply it to the rest of us. Is there any kind of book that shows this build up over the centuries, even before the American Revolution, of all these groups? And I know we don't have as much information about it, but to me, that's a very interesting way to try to convince people, at least give them pause to say, well, gee, I came from this. Is that so good?
Yeah. Offhand, I don't know what I should suggest to you in terms of reading. But if you do leave me or send me your email, you can do it by text here, or you can send it through the society.
Right.
I had to try and get a book or two for you to look at, but right off the top of my head, I can't think precisely with respect to the issue.
No, I understand. If you could find anything in that area, I'd be very interested. Thank you. I will send you my email through the chat here.
Great. That sounds great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard. And we have our next hand up is Pam Berglund. Pam, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Sandy, for your great talk. What I find so frustrating right now is we have seen investigations on television into Donald Trump's horrible January 6th transgressions, and yet we have not been able to they have not been able to convict him of anything. They have not been able to touch him in any way. And it is so frustrating. And also because of the fact that we don't really have anybody that we're looking out for Democratic candidates in the future. So I'm frustrated. Why are we allowing all these investigations to occur and nothing happens? Why isn't this man being punished, thrown in jail, demoralized, and yet millions and millions want him back in the office?
Because there's those two parts to this. One is because he has a lot of fucking money, and he can get enough lawyers lined up to make it really difficult to get him to court with anything that sticks. Secondly, he's got a lot of psychopathic followers who want nothing more than to transform this country back into a gun-toting religious community. That's what it seems to me. I'm not sure if the legal system is equipped to deal with the sort of chaos that this man has been able to throw against the wall. And I'm not sure that anything's going to come of any of these investigations. I too hope, along with the rest of us, that he does, that something is done to knock him down off of his pulpit. But right now there is a religiously eschatological movement that sees him as the king of America, and they want to install their king or reinstall their king. It's a frightening situation.
Thank you, Pam. David, back to the room. We do have another hand raised in Zoom, just so you
Okay.
know.
We've got a hand up here. Kurt Collier.
Uh-oh.
Not at all. Hey,
Let me
Sandy.
correct myself.
Wow. Sandy, I thought your take on the kind of eschatological roots of religion in America and how they relate to the QAnon followers was great. I think there's a dissertation in that, although I think Balmer or some other people may have beat us to the punch. I do think that what I don't want to lose sight of is the other things that we can do. Yes, we need to vote. Yes, we need to continue to push for those kinds of stuff. But I think one of the things that's, there's 25% of America was always millennialist. That's about who follows of the QAnon. So it makes perfect sense. I thought that was a very insightful thing to say, Sandy. But I also know that a lot of people are underemployed, don't have health insurance. There are not enough high-paying jobs. Young adults don't want to go in those jobs. There's a lot of anxiety on it. And I think the way to counteract those things are to go to vote and kind of stuff, but our focus should be on jobs, affordable health care, housing, the other things that I think they're fueling this hatred in the background, or at least people to keep this going. And I thought the thing about paying off student debts at college is a brilliant move. I mean, that's something that has to happen, especially since a lot of those people who we're talking about went to these for-profit and kind of predatory vocational training programs that charge large amounts of money. I think making sure, and we're not talking about healthcare anymore, even though they gave up on trying to do away with Obamacare and things like that. Those things need to be stressed as well. So I'm just trying to make sure we always have a balance, that it's not just us versus them, that what's driving that are things that are universal to both of us. And the reason why Republicans win or conservatives win politically is that they're talking about jobs often, even if I don't completely agree with that. And the fearful thing is that Trump could say, let's go to the barricades, and thousands of Americans will. I think if Elon Musk called for war, there'd be even more power behind people like that, because of so many youth who listen to him and things like that. And so I just want to make sure, how do we, given with the fact that, yes, 25% of Americans have this eschatological view and believe we're in a holy war and type of things, that number has always pretty much been there. But I do think, I don't want to lose and get called in, or forget and chase after that red ball, and go after that and lose the fact that we still need to be talking about jobs and the economy and things like that, which is what the pundits say we may that the people on the political left may lose again over.
I don't think he's looking for an answer from me. I just think he made some good points.
Okay.
I think
One more question here.
Nancy is looking to speak up on.
Yes,
not a
we'll have one
question.
more question
Yeah, go ahead,
from
go
the
ahead.
room, and then we'll go to Nancy.
This very brief. It's not a question, but I just want to remind everybody that Monday is Indigenous Peoples' Day, and they're the ones that those other guys try to wipe out. And there's a lot of value in their principles and their values, and maybe if each of us spread a little bit of the word, this land, which was called ultimately America, would be restored to some sanity.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Back to Zoomland.
Okay, thank you. We have Nancy Wadler. Would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay, it's been so long that I can't even, I wanted to reply to what Sandy said, and I agreed with him about a lot of things. But I think when he talks about people murdering indigenous peoples, this is the nature of mankind. Look at the Romans, look at the Greeks, look at Alexander the Great, look at the Ottoman Empire. This has gone on over and over and over again. This is who we are as people. Horrible. But now we have Donald Trump, who took the lid off the Pandora's box of what already existed, and he just let it come free. So the main comment I want to make is that I never thought I would ever say this, but I think the best thing that happened is that Roe v. Wade was overturned, because now It'll make lazy Democrats come out and vote, and it will make Republicans who are on the normal side come out and vote for Democrats. So I think in a weird way, the overturning of Roe v. Wade was a good thing and not a bad thing. And relative to the Supreme Court, are we not supposed to have a separation of church and state? Yes. Amy Coney Barrett belongs to a Catholic cult, and she wears special underwear. So my question is this: she is sitting all day with all the other justices. How can she really be a free-thinking person when she's in those special undies?
How did you find out about these special undies?
Oh, a long time ago. The Mormons wear special underwear. Hasidic Jews wear special underwear. And there's a reason. The reason is that they want them to be conscious.
Ah, okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Better if Amy Barrett remains unconscious.
Well, I think she is unconscious.
Thank you,
Nancy.
Nancy.
That's fascinating, fascinating, Nancy. I do appreciate your joining us today, really.
Thank you.
And let me say it's Dr. Krolick.
Dr. Krolick, that's right.
Correct.
Thank you. We have a comment in the chat from Richard saying, I think the Department of Justice will act after the midterms when he announces for the presidency in 2024. So that's a comment. And we have Gloria Smith. Please unmute yourself, Gloria, and ask your question. Can you unmute, Gloria? You're trying. Okay.
There it is.
Okay.
I understand everything that's been presented so far this morning. It's very good, but there's always in my mind another side to this situation. Why do we have such a massive response to some of these people? After Trump, there could be someone else. I can go back to the French Revolution, the Crusades, many other instances where you have a massive response of people just following without critical thinking. And I see that going on today, and it's with Trump. And my fear is, after Trump, will there be someone else, and will there again be a massive response without thinking it through?
Well, I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying. I don't know if it's unthinking. I think that they have a rationale, I think.
Yes.
And it's not a very pleasant rationale, but I think they are following a lead that is, it's certainly misguided, but they have their rationale, and it's exemplified by their would-be leader, Donald Trump. So there's almost a social psychosis that's taken over a large portion of the country.
That's what I'm getting.
And they think that what they're doing is reasonable in their misguided way, but it's something that we have to watch out for and address maybe more stringently than we have up until now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Gloria.
We have one hand up and we have one in Zoom, and those will be the last questions, but I'm going to ask both people, we're running short on time. I'm going to ask both people to keep their comments or questions very short, okay?
Yeah, so I think a lot of good comments were made, and I agree with a lot of the different things that people have said. And I want to go back to what Kurt said, because I had posed that question: that what was Trump symptomatic of? And now the last speaker just suggested, yeah, that Trump is just symptomatic of these conditions. And then she mentioned,
let's keep it short.
So you mentioned that they're misguided, and I would agree with you, but I would go back to what Kurt said. I think that there's something about what they think that is.
We're really running out of time.
Has reality based, but they're misguided in their solutions. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I think I think you're right. But they are on a track, and they're going to stay on that track. Right or wrong.
Javier in
Thank you.
Zoomland gets the last question or comment.
I wanted to know, based on the characteristics of religion through history, always being exploited as the opium for the mass, how of that are we living today with our politicians?
Well, the religion being the opium of the masses, and you want to know how that relates to the politics of today?
Yes. I wanted to know how much are they using that concept?
I think, yeah, Javier, I think Donald Trump is using it exceptionally well. I think he is dipping into the pot of religion strongly. And I don't think he believes in anything, quite frankly, but I think he is just an opportunist. But he's using the religious ideology in order to build himself up.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Sandy, for that very original and incisive and provocative analysis. I don't think I've heard anyone quite flesh out QAnon as a religious movement the way you did. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, David.
I will ask our ushers to take up a collection for the work of the society, and while they are doing that, I will thank our speaker again, Sandy Krolick, for joining us. I'll also thank our greeters and ushers, Lisa and Ron Schwartz, who are collecting right now, our Zoom coordinator, my dear wife, Susan Lesh, our hybrid engineer, Eric Sandhusen, our musician, Rob Eigenbrode, and I'd like to thank you, our members and visitors, for joining us this morning. If you'd like to get more information about us, our Zoom coordinator, Susan, will put that information in the chat room. Basically, you can email me at admin@ethicalfocus.org. And if there are any committees who have announcements, I will ask them to come up and make an announcement. Rob, yes, go ahead. You don't have to.
May I make an announcement?
Yes, you may, even though you're not representing a committee. But yes.
Actually, if Eric can turn, there we go, perfect. I have this mic here. That's right, I'm not on a committee, but I do have an announcement. I want to make a musical announcement for Clue, which we're going to be opening soon. This is the song that we will be shooting a video for tomorrow to advertise the show. So here's the song I wrote for Clue. There's a group of strangers in a mansion on a stormy night. It's Clue. It's Clue. They don't know why they're there, but they will get a proper fright. It's Clue. It's Clue. They're sitting down to dinner, but their host has not arrived. Someone recognizes someone else. Ooh, they have one thing in common, and it soon will be revealed. But before you know it, somebody's been killed. Ah! Colonel Mustard, Mr. Green, Miss Scarlet, Mrs. Peacock too, including Professor Plum and Mrs. White. They learn which room with what and who. In Clue. If you'd like to know who done it, you can get your ticket now. It opens on October 29th. That's soon. The Bergen County Players will present the mystery farce, Clue, for you.
I want to mention that the society is having a sort of informal theater party. If you'd like to see Clue with Rob in it, it's November 13th that we're doing it, right? That's right. Yeah, on November, The matinee on November 13th. Thanks, Ginger. So if you'd like to join us for that, you buy tickets on your own, and tickets are selling out quickly. And then after the show, there's a cafe down the block, and we're going to gather for our own little private talk back with Rob.
And let Diane Kaczorski.
And let Diane, thank you. And let Diane Kaczorski know, right. But if you are going to do that, so we'll know how big a reservation to make. Any other announcements to make? Oh, okay, Susan, on Zoom.
Thank you. Yes, as festivals chair, I'm announcing that our first festival this year will be the Fall Pumpkin Festival on October 30th, the day after Clue opens. It's a Sunday from 4 until 6. You're invited to come. You're invited to come and bring friends, enjoy making us some more, enjoy some monsters, enjoy some treats, and also enjoy our socializing together. It's going to be outdoors in the parking lot, and it's going to be very fun. Look for our flyers and our information. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Last year's festival was terrific. That was a terrific festival. Anything else? I think not. Okay, well, this concludes our program, but it does not conclude the platform. I invite everyone in the meeting house to stay for informal conversation and refreshments. And I invite our Zoom coordinator to unmute everyone on Zoom so they can stay on and chat amongst themselves. If the speaker, Sandy Krolick, still has time, he can stay on also and engage in that conversation if his time permits. And finally, I'll ask the meeting house to drop from the Zoom call itself to make the conversations in Zoom land easier. Thank you all for coming.
Okay. Thank you. So I can't actually unmute everyone. You need to do that yourselves, but now is the time to do that. And thanks for joining us this morning. Sandy, I just wanted to say, David and I went down to the Sandy Hook National Park one day just to, just go walk on the seashore. And we saw a big bus with an enormous banner of Trump. This was last year, of Trump in like, photoshopped in a weird, like muscular thing with a spear and a gun, and he's
like Jupiter, huh?
Just crazy. So they're using symbols like that, that we don't really see too much in mainstream, but you'll see it around. I mean,
there's a lot of mythology behind what's going on.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the time you gave me this morning. I enjoyed speaking. I enjoyed the questions.
Yeah. It's how to get the people. So this is a whole fringe area. It's like a large fringe that has a voice now, but how do we get the people who are Republicans and independents? How do we get them to say, no, don't go with that kind of crazy kind of thing. It's very hard.
I think Trump controls a large majority, a good swath of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And I think there are definitely a number of elected representatives and senators who don't want to follow him, but are afraid of losing their positions.
Right. Justifying the means to get to their ends.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough. Teresa, do you see this you're in Arizona?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you see it a lot there?
I see a lot here. There are a lot of active civic groups here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to wait to the election to see which way it's going to turn. I'm like 50-50 about it.
Wow.
Yeah. Arizona is a big turning point.
Cynic, yeah. But there have been a lot of people from California who moved here. So maybe instead of red, it'll be purple.
Yeah.
And there are a tremendous amount of independents out here because you can register as an independent.
So they don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, Sandy, I'm a high school teacher, and I've long thought that there's an unspoken and unwritten social contract between the students and I that allows me to be able to teach them, that they do what I request and they follow my procedures.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that unwritten or unspoken social contract permeates a lot of our society.
Yeah, it does, absolutely, and it's transforming itself as we watch too. I mean, the American dream is that is something that was a contract, basically an unspoken contract between all members, and that's undergoing radical transformation.
Yeah, we don't have much of a middle class anymore, and they were really the recipients of that social contract.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Richard.
Thank you. I missed some of the lecture, but I equate to it very well. And I'm also an engineer, somebody said it, and a retired engineer, but interested in history. But it seems to me some of the elements that drive this minority group have existed for many years in many forms through history. But what's different today, and you could call it kind of a superstorm, is the internet, social media, which gives a super minority the ability to spread lies and talk to a super majority that never existed, as far as I understand, in world history.
Yeah.
And the other is the overriding problem with our environment. I think whether consciously or unconsciously is affecting many people, that they realize the earth in general is on a downward trend. And I think people have a fear and an anxiety about that, and it probably radicalizes people, perhaps in the wrong direction. So those are my comments. I don't know what to do about the internet. It's an enigma. How do you solve it without, that is the social media spreading lies? How do you solve it without
it's
suppressing freedom of speech?
It's a fait accompli in a large sense, but obviously there are. I mean, Facebook and some of the others, Twitter and stuff, have worked at trying to silence what seems like violent extremism. But as you say, Richard, it's free and open communication. It's a free society, and freedom of speech is one of the cornerstones. So it's a really slippery slope. But we're in a very precarious situation right now. I agree with you.
Yeah, Trump has his Truth Network to get around Facebook and Twitter.
But it's not very successful, from what I understand.
Yes.
Well,
it's not. A lot of people have pulled out their money.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that, but that's a good thing. But obviously, people can start their own network easily enough and spread as many lies as they wish. I mean, back in the day, I'm talking about many years ago, how did news spread? It was basically local newspapers. And so the information was localized. Now it can be spread all over the place. So it's pretty scary.
And this country, as you pointed out, Richard, it has a history of violent overthrow. I mean, we came in the Pilgrims and the adventurers, and they came in and they undid the Indians, the American Indians' grasp on the land in various forms, and those changes keep reoccurring and reemerging. Those efforts, and I think we are in for a pretty big problem.
No, I think we are too, and I'm afraid to say I think there will be some violence, but my hope is that there is enough people that have evolved enough that they will adhere to the rule of law when it's presented to them thoroughly and simply, which is what I think the DOJ is trying to do at this point. Why they haven't indicted him yet. I think they want to cross every T and dot every I and show in how many ways he has violated the law. I mean, in the end, they got Al Capone for tax evasion. I'd be okay if they got him for tax evasion. I really may not be the best, but it needs to be a cautionary tale.
Yeah,
that you can't act like this.
I agree. Well, folks, I'm going to head out, but I appreciate everything, all your comments today and your diligence in listening to me.
No, thank you very much, Doctor. I have to say, in a very, I don't want this to sound negative, but I grew up in Southern Jersey, and my mother was a Methodist, and I could not believe how some of those preachers would get up on the stage and how they would preach fire and brimstone. I didn't think you were preaching fire and brimstone. Don't get me wrong.
No,
but some of the echoes of what we have to worry about, stress. I mean, they used to stress that all the time from their point of view, and it was horrible.
I mean, I quoted.
Yours is good.
I quoted St. John's. I quoted St. John.
Yeah, so, no, that's fine. And I'm sorry I didn't get to the meeting right away. I slept late, but I'm sorry I didn't use your honorific doctor.
If you send me your, did you send me your email? Did I?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in there.
I will
send it to Lucy. You'll get it.
Yeah, I got it. I got it through Lucy. I will send you both a copy of my talk and
thank you.
On a book or two that you can look at. Okay.
Thank you so much. That would be very kind of you.